Welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Betty Chen. As the U.S. elections approach, recent developments have seen Chinese President Xi Jinping meeting with representatives from the American business sector in Beijing, followed by a nearly 2-hour phone call with U.S. President Joe Biden. On the same day, U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen embarked on her second trip to China, coupled with Secretary of State Antony Blinken's planned visit, signaling frequent pre-election engagements between the U.S. and China. What new dynamics will emerge in U.S.-China relations? Joining us today are Huang Kwei-bo, National Chengchi University Professor of Diplomacy, and Lev Nachman, National Chengchi University College of Social Sciences Assistant Professor. A warm welcome to both of you on the show. The conversation between President Biden and President Xi builds on the last year's summit, aiming to further develop relations. The U.S. National Security Communications Advisor John Kirby noted that there's no substitute, of course, for regular communication at a leader level to effectively manage this complex and often tense bilateral relationship. So let's start with today's conversation. I understand that, we all understand that the leader said that. For the both sides, they have agreed to have dialogue when necessary. But why do they have this 105-minute phone call at this moment? Any particular significance, Professor?
First of all, I think it's a very good example of so-called summit diplomacy. Because in the past, usually ambassadors would take care of most of the things in diplomacy or external affairs between states. However, nowadays, I think top leaders, especially national leaders, are expected or hoped to come out to discuss some intertwined issues that cannot be solved easily by any single minister or like secretary level officials in the states. That is why they need to sort out a lot of things to be discussed to the table of their respective leaders, and their leaders are going to meet either face to face or in the internet in order to figure it out whether these two countries or states will be able to solve the problems by steps. So summit diplomacy, shows its significance in contemporary diplomacy. And also, I want to say that this Biden-Xi meeting, to me, is a regular summit meeting between the two top leaders. Because look at the past, between Biden and Xi Jinping, I think they have met at least 3 to 5 times per year, either face-to-face or a webinar. And that shows the urgency and the need for the two sides to have these top-level meetings. That is why Kirby said there's no substitute. I agree with that. And one last point for this summit between the two top leaders is that I think they take advantage of this summit-like meeting in order to have some domestic consumption. For either Xi Jinping or Joe Biden, they need to demonstrate their capability of managing these very complicated bilateral relationships. So they have had these meetings in many forms so that they can show to their domestic audience or targets, hey, see, I'm here and I'm good at these bilateral relations.
So by having this high-level meetings between the two leaders, and only these two leaders, not anybody else can do their job, it's not only showing to the world, it's also showing their citizens they're trying to improve relations. That's your views, yes. Right? So Professor, what's your view?
I fully agree with what Dr. Huang said. I think it's no secret. The elephant in the room is that U.S.-China relations have been at their maybe all-time low these last 2 years in a very long time. And there's real need and urgency for leaders like Biden and Xi to speak directly. It's true that this is not something at this point in time that should really be left up to lower level officials, and there's true value in having the heads of state be the ones to communicate. This allows us to minimize miscommunications, misunderstandings, and gives opportunity for leaders to speak frankly without the need of having a second-hand interpretation. I really think, especially now, given the activity happening in East Asia. There's never been a more pivotal time where U.S.-China relations need to have a floor to stand on. And we've seen that. This isn't so much the first time we've been finding a floor. There have been diplomats that have been hard at work for the last couple of years trying to find a balance for the U.S. and China relationship to sort of start over in a way that's more healthy and more productive. And having this phone call preemptively before the face-to-face meeting, I think is going to do a lot of good for the U.S.-China relationship. And it's also worth emphasizing that a healthy U.S.-China relationship is good for Taiwan, and it's good for the East Asia as a region. It is better that Biden and Xi have open lines of communication, and it's better for everyone that they feel comfortable being able to communicate with each other. When Biden and Xi don't talk to each other, it only makes instability and possible misunderstanding increase.
Indeed, so communication is a good thing. So in their phone call, they talk about a wide range of issues ranging from the South China Sea to TikTok and also military issues and even Taiwan. Do you think that this kind of conversation can really ease the current U.S.-China tensions?
It's not going to melt everything overnight, but this really is, step one into being able to find some sort of way to navigate a lot of these really difficult subjects. Whether it's TikTok or the green sector with Yellen's visit, these are really complex topics, let alone, of course, Taiwan, that Biden and Xi need to be able to speak frankly about in a way to ensure each other that there is a mutual understanding of where each state is coming from.
Professor Huang.
I think the two top leaders did talk, and they did exchange ideas on so many important issues, as you just mentioned. But whether or not these two leaders have reached some tacit understanding about these complicated issues, whether or not these two leaders either have had some compromise or accommodation towards the things they are talking about during their meetings, actually, I have no clue. And not to mention, a lot of issues you brought up, like the TikTok issue, the South China Sea issues, they are so difficult to be resolved in such a short period of time. Therefore, my hunch that, yes, they have some direct communication, and they have very candid exchange of ideas about these critical issues, as Lev just mentioned. But whether or not this candid dialogue is very constructive, or this candid dialogue can be transformed to some driving forces for better relationships between Beijing and Washington, I don't know. Because to me, I think Washington has insisted on a lot of things that are aimed at pressurize Beijing on many fronts, like the technology front or the trade front. But for Beijing also shows some assertive attitudes, like the Taiwan Strait, or like these U.S. so-called competition with mainland China in science and technology. So on these issues, I do not see any compromise or accommodation between the two leaders. So my point is, better have talks than no talks. But whether or not this will be a very major step to ease the tension between Washington and Beijing, I do not think that's possible.
Definitely, we understand that these wide range of issues cannot be resolved within this short phone call. But one thing that President Xi mentioned, which is very important to him, is definitely the Taiwan issue. And he reiterated that Taiwan issue is a red line that should not be crossed. So, because Taiwan is going to have the presidential inauguration on May 20th. So what kind of message do you think that he's trying to send to the U.S. and to the world, and even to Taiwan, Professor?
A lot of analysts said Xi Jinping has been drawing a red line on the Taiwan issue. I think that's the way Xi Jinping is trying to do, because look at what Xi Jinping said to Biden this time. They have no difference in what Xi Jinping said to Biden in previous times. So why bother saying so many times, about the same thing, with the same tone? Of course, because Xi Jinping would like to show Biden that this Taiwan issue is the first priority I have, in addition to our bilateral science technology conflict or trade competition. So what Xi Jinping said to Biden is nothing new, but something repetitive in order to bring to U.S. attention that this Taiwan issue, you, Washington, had better take care of that with care. And also, talking about Taiwan, I think, I believe the two top leaders have had some tacit understanding about how to manage the tension in the Taiwan Strait. We always joke that sometimes the shortest route between Beijing and Washington is the shortest route between Beijing and Taipei is via Washington. Therefore, I think the two leaders are practicing something like, let's talk about Taiwan and let me know what you want to do. And I will tell you what I want to do. So no surprise, but the common goal for the both of us is to maintain peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait, particularly when William Lai, this upcoming president in Taipei, may be promoting something more assertive or provocative if he continues his policy line of the so-called practical Taiwan independence worker.
So following this same line, for you, Lev, I just want to know that President Biden also told Xi that do not interfere with U.S. elections, and also he definitely oppose Taiwan independence and also want to maintain the one China policy. Do you think that Biden is doing the same thing as what Professor Huang said? He's just repeating what he wants Xi to understand.
Absolutely. Nothing Xi said is new. Nothing Biden said is new. Neither country's policies towards Taiwan have changed. It's just a matter of every time there's this high level of dialogue, you have to say these lines again. And of course, even if it's the same thing we've heard over and over again, it's another elephant in the room that William Lai is going to be president in May, and that means a changing of leadership. Now, William Lai has arguably successfully convinced most of the world that he's not pursuing independence and that instead he is going to follow Tsai Ing-wen's status quo policy. And even if Washington believes that, Xi Jinping is likely not going to be as sympathetic towards whatever William Lai says he is or is not going to do. So I think for a lot of leaders, it's a matter of trying to ease into the William Lai administration with the same level of ease that we've had with the Tsai administration over the last 8 years. And the challenge for Beijing and Washington is to sort of acknowledge this transition of leadership in Taiwan without formally acknowledging it, because we know that the PRC doesn't recognize when the DPP is in power, doesn't have open lines of communication with the DPP, which means that the next best way of talking to the DPP is actually talking to Biden and through DC.
So, do you think that the U.S. China relations has changed ever since the summit between Biden and Xi last year? And do you think that this phone call will even make the U.S. China relations better?
Yeah, I think last year we found the floor to stand on.
Right.
And now I think we're just trying to keep our balance. And we're trying to make sure that this goes into as productive of a direction as we can. I agree with Dr. Huang that we don't know if they're able to solve these issues. But like I said before, it is far more important that they're able to talk about these issues, because that is how you eventually get to, at the very least, a place of understanding where you know that there's not an antagonism or there's not a purposeful angering of each other's side. And so, even though it is going to take time, and the new administration in Taiwan coming into office in May is most certainly going to have an impact on that relationship, I do think we are I am optimistic. I know not everyone in this sphere is optimistic, but seeing Biden and Xi speaking for almost 2 hours before a known face-to-face meeting versus, say, 2 years ago when lines of communication were cut off, this is qualitatively better.
Right. What do you think, Professor Huang?
U.S. China relations. I think the utmost goal for the two top leaders is to pursue peace and stability between the two sides, Washington and Beijing, because again, Biden is going to run for his presidential election, especially in this coming November, and Xi Jinping is encountering some domestic problems that he has, to take care of, especially those economic problems. I think that would be, most dangerous for the Xi administration. So, if this common goal between Washington and Beijing does exist, then I would say that there would be a policy of no surprise for Washington towards Beijing and for Beijing towards Washington. And therefore, not only the Taiwan Strait, but also the South China Sea will become more important, because I think along the coastline of the Chinese mainland, now the Taiwan Strait and the South China Sea, now the two most possible flashpoints for the upcoming, armed conflict between Washington and Beijing.
So we understand the complicated relations between Taipei, Washington, and also Beijing, especially in the Taiwan Strait. Say if the Lai administration assumes office in May, what should Taiwan do? How should Taiwan position itself? Now, cross-strait communication is basically suspended, but we know communication is a good thing. So what would you suggest that Taiwan should do in terms of dealing with relations with Beijing and also Washington?
A very common line a lot of people have suggested William Lai and his upcoming administration is to abide by the Republic of China Constitution and the act regulating the two sides of the strait, that is regulating the people in Taiwan and people in the mainland. By those laws or constitution, could William Lai be seen as a more responsible leader in Taipei? And also, I think William Lai, at least in his first 6 months, will be less provocative because, as I said just now, the U.S. is going to have its own presidential election, and no top leader in Washington would like to see a turbulent sea in the Taiwan Strait. But after November, actually, I have no clue because that will depend on who the U.S. the new U.S. president will be.
Lev.
Yeah, I agree that ultimately this is a big question that will change after November. But between now and then, we're still going to have 5 months of a Lai administration, and I believe William Lai when he says he's going to follow Tsai Ing-wen's footsteps, at least for this first initial time period, where I think there's constraints both from Washington and domestically that are going to prevent any sort of radical change in Taiwan's policy. I don't expect any sort of radical change between, at the very least, now and November, if not between now and the next local elections here in Taiwan. Where I think the best thing William Lai can do is to really try to focus on honestly domestic stability, because we've seen in the legislative UN already a bit of a very dramatic start to the new administration. So what William Lai can do best is to really try to find a sense of common ground and unity in Taiwan.
So you talk about the phone call. The timing actually coincides with Janet Yellen's trip to China. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, the first Biden administration official to visit China twice, expressed concerns over China's overproduction of electric vehicles, solar cells, lithium batteries, and other goods, flooding the global market, affecting American manufacturing. What significant outcomes and consensus were reached during her visit, and how will they impact the global economy? So from the U.S. perspective, we understand that this overcapacity issue is really important. So we understand that also for the United States, they think this is bringing negative impact on their domestic economy. And now, Janet Yellen, the Biden administration's official, visiting China twice. What's the significance of timing? And she's going to Guangzhou. So what does that mean?
So there's the silver lining to the trips, which is to say, like, we have a high-level, very critical figure in American politics visiting China at a very crucial time. I think there's a good reason to celebrate these two visits. I think it shows very clear and frank communication between China and the United States. At the same time, we know that Yellen is there to try to understand how America can have a respectful relationship with China while also protecting America's own economy. We know that within the green sector, there's just been a flood of Chinese supply, because in China there just has not been as much domestic spending, or at least purchase of a lot of the green energy technologies that have been produced in China. And so then China sort of floods the global market with all these goods, and that's really hurting America's ability to really grow the sector. And so I think what Yellen's goal is to try to see is to understand what exactly China's strategy is going to be in the future, and then how can America productively respond in a way that still works on rebuilding the U.S.-China economic relationship.
Professor Huang.
You know, it's about very major public policy in the economic realm. So I think we have quite a few different angles to look at it. For example, from the U.S. perspective, of course, the U.S. said the overcapacity in mainland China actually has caused some problems for the U.S. and for some other developed markets. Maybe yes, because mainland China has been able to produce a lot of products of low cost. You know, that would, you know, lower the competitiveness of these developed markets and developed countries' production products. But from another perspective, which I just learned from my friends of economics department, that, you know, with this capacity or overcapacity of mainland China, could those less developed countries like African countries or Latin American countries could acquire products of lower cost, which is good for their people. So they don't have to buy some expensive products from, say, Europe or the U.S. So these are only two perspectives in relation to what Yellen said to Beijing leaders. So actually, I have no clue, because I think it needs time to see whether or not. Of course, you know, mainland China's use of subsidies may be against the general rules within the World Trade Organization. But whether or not, you know, these subsidies leading to overcapacity is very bad to the whole world. I think, you know, economic experts and public policy experts have had some big debate.
So you talk about, actually, it may not be a bad thing for the low-cost products to be sold to other parts of the world, but for the United States, they think, well, this is for them unfair trade practices, and that's why Yellen has been visiting China twice. Do you think that the U.S. is really concerned about these overcapacity and overproduction, worrying that the Chinese products may hurt the American economy?
Following the thread of thoughts during the Trump administration, I think the U.S. has been thinking about this overproduction, overcapacity of mainland China that are doing some harm on U.S. production and U.S. economic competitiveness on the world stage. So I think that thread of thought will be continued because mainland China has been the most possible competitor for the U.S. on the world market. Therefore, I do not think this issue will be solved easily. But this debate, you know, overcapacity is good or bad for the world economy. I think that will be that will become a very interesting topic in the near future.
Lev,
so we know this isn't just an American problem.
Right.
You know, Japan, Mexico, so many other countries are really feeling the inability to grow their own green sectors because of China's overflooding of these markets, where even if it does help, say, a handful of the poorest countries gain access to these goods, it's still going to hinder growth and the ability for innovation and competition in so many other parts of the world. And the challenge is, you know, not just how do we deal with China's trade practices, but also, you know, I think there's something to be said about what this means for China's own domestic economy. If China is having to look globally to sell so many of these goods, what does that say about its own domestic spending and domestic consumption of these green technologies?
So talking about the supply chain, we understand that, well, this is a very important issue. Also, Taiwan might be affected. And according to Yellen, she did not rule out the use of tariffs and other measures to protect U.S. supply chains. Do you think that if the U.S. adopt this kind of practice, will this intensify the competition between the U.S. and China?
You know, I don't think we're all the way to you know, capital T tariffs. I think that really signals a very drastic approach.
Right.
I think this is why Yellen is making her trips. I think it's to try to fully understand what are the practical policy implementations the United States can take in order to sort of mitigate the damage that's being faced to the United States' ability to grow this sector, while also, again, being able to engage China in a friendly and respectable manner.
Professor Huang.
We have to look at 2 points. First, if Xi Jinping is to make some compromise, then his compromise will be in exchange of what? What could the U.S. give mainland China in order to make Xi Jinping have some compromise? And point 2 is that the U.S. is already in its presidential election mode. So why bother, giving Joe Biden an advantage when Biden is facing Trump, if Trump is going to win? So I think Beijing is going to sit there watching the result of the U.S. presidential election, then Beijing will make its own decision.
So my quick final question now, Janet Yellen goes to China on behalf of Biden. Say if he wins, we understand Biden's position. But if Trump wins, what's going to happen in terms of the tariffs and also the competition with China?
So we've heard Trump say a lot about what he intends to do if he wins in November. Unfortunately, there's so much unpredictability, uncertainty, and risk that surrounds a second Trump administration that it's almost impossible to actually know what Trump would do. That's compounded by the fact that we have zero idea of who's would be working on Trump's team for China and Taiwan.
Right.
We know that the past team that did a lot for productive U.S.-Taiwan relations, people like Mike Pompeo and Matt Pottinger, will not be in a new Trump administration. Pompeo has essentially cut ties with Trump, and Matt Pottinger testified against Trump on the January 6th trial. So, it's so hard to say what a Trump admin will do with U.S.-China relations, and I think that is why all eyes will be on the United States this November.
Definitely, it's still too early for us to tell what's going to happen. But thank you very much. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for your insights. If you like our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up, and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching our show today. Stay safe and see you next time.